It is 8 in the morning at the Woodlands, a cemetery and historic estate in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The summer of 2020. Robin Rick, the facility manager, stands beneath a canopy of old trees, but he is not looking at the architecture or the headstones. He is brushing insects off his face. Beside him, Michelle Niedermeyer, a Penn State Extension coordinator, reaches up to clear a cluster of spotted wings from her shirt. A few paces away, Penn State entomologist Osaria Kemwin Uyi sweeps a white canvas net through the low brush. In a single morning, this small crew will gather more than 3,000 spotted lanternflies from this one location. The insects land on their hats. They crawl up their faces. They coat the trunks like a living, shifting layer of bark. And standing inside that swarm, a person could be forgiven for believing this fight is already lost. Here is what makes that belief wrong. The United States has spent enormous sums of public and private money to stop this insect. Quarantines, permits, millions of gallons of chemicals. None of it has worked the way anyone promised. And yet the thing now quietly bringing the spotted lanternfly to heel is not the money and not the chemicals. It is a coalition of native creatures that no agency hired, no scientist released, and no budget paid for. To understand how that happened, you have to understand how badly the war went first. Less than a decade before that morning in Philadelphia, not a single one of these insects existed anywhere on the North American continent. A planthopper the size of a thumbnail, unable to fly more than a few dozen yards at a stretch, arrived silently as a smear of microscopic eggs cemented to the underside of a commercial stone shipment. From that one accidental entry, it forced state governments, federal agencies, and thousands of independent growers into a grinding multi-state containment campaign, one that has consumed tens of millions of dollars and still shows no clean conclusion. In the vineyards of the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, the damage is immediate and visible. Vines that once produced tons of high-value grapes are drained of their fluids, turning brittle and black. Fields that should smell of ripening fruit instead reek of fermented honeydew under dense sheets of black mold. It is an ecological siege engine wrapped in a shell of gray, black, and crimson. But the real story here is stranger than a bug eating a crop, and the way it actually ends is stranger still. It begins in 2014 in the brush of Berks County, Pennsylvania. That September, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, confirmed a strange, brightly colored population of planthoppers thriving in the undergrowth. The insect is Lycorma delicatula, native to the forests of China, India, and Vietnam. In its homeland, it is unremarkable. One species among many, held in check by predators and parasites that evolved alongside it over thousands of years. But global trade does not carry the predators. It carries only the passenger. Investigators traced the likely arrival to a shipment of industrial stone that had left an East Asian port around 2012. Clinging to that rough gray surface were several flat, mud-colored masses, each holding dozens of perfectly preserved eggs. The shipment cleared port and moved inland without incident. For 2 years, in total obscurity, the insects hatched, fed, and multiplied. No one imported this pest on purpose. It was a trade accident, a statistical near certainty born from sheer volume. Billions of tons of stone, pallets, and consumer goods cross the oceans every year, and an egg mass the color of dried mud is simply too inconspicuous for routine inspection to catch. Once the threat was named, the response was swift, expensive, and total. Agencies drew quarantine zones on maps, prohibiting the movement of firewood, brush, and equipment without inspection. They required permit training for commercial drivers, turning thousands of logistics workers into frontline inspectors. They ran public campaigns urging citizens to scrape egg masses off bark and crush every adult on site. They deployed millions of gallons of chemical countermeasures. The guidelines from Penn State Extension and the Virginia Cooperative Extension became a field manual. Dormant oil to smother eggs before spring, contact insecticides to kill the young nymphs in the grass, systemic insecticides to turn the sap of a tree into poison. Money poured in. The Department of Agriculture later formalized a 5-year federal strategy spanning fiscal years 2024 through 2028, aligning agencies into a single defensive line. And still, the front line kept moving. No quarantine stopped them. No poison contained them. No public campaign erased them. The brute force approach kept running into one fact it could not spray away. Every gain made in one county could be erased by a single truck crossing a state line with a fresh cluster of eggs riding under its bumper. And that points to the first thing almost everyone got wrong. For years, the public story cast the lanternfly as a hyper-aggressive invader, marching across a continent by sheer biological dominance. The data says the opposite. Left alone, the spotted lanternfly is a remarkably poor traveler. It lacks the wings for long-distance flight and the instinct to wander far from where it hatched. On its own, it moves only short distances in an entire lifetime. The real engine of the invasion is not the insect's legs, it is ours. The villain of this story is the transportation network. Every highway, rail line, and shipping corridor is a high-speed conveyor belt for the pest. An adult hitches a ride on the grill of a semi. An egg mass is laid on the underside of a rusty railcar or a parked camper. By the time the vehicle stops, the insect has been carried 50, 100, 500 miles into pristine ground. We did not simply let the invader in, we are the ones driving it to its next destination. Keep that fact in your pocket, because it is also the reason the eventual solution had to come from somewhere we weren't looking. Look closely at how this insect actually kills, and the scale of the problem comes into focus. The spotted lanternfly is not a fly. It is a planthopper, a true bug, and it passes through 4 nymphal stages before adulthood. Young, it is black with stark white spots, wingless, moving by hops from powerful hind legs. In its 4th stage, it turns brilliant crimson, mottled black and white, bigger, hungrier. By late summer, it molts a final time into the adult, pinkish-gray forewings flecked with black, opening to flashes of red and solid black beneath. Its mouth is a needle-like beak, a stylet. It does not chew. It pierces bark and taps directly into the phloem, the vessels that carry a plant's sugars. The fluid is under such pressure that the insect barely has to feed. The plant's own circulation pushes the sap into its gut. That single mechanism creates 2 disasters. First, the drain itself. In a vineyard, thousands of insects bleeding a vine of the carbohydrate reserves it needs to survive winter, causing dieback or outright death the following year. Second, the exhaust. Because the sap is rich in sugar but poor in protein, the insect must process enormous volumes and excrete the excess as a sticky, clear rain called honeydew. That honeydew coats leaves and ground, and it feeds a black sooty mold that crusts over the foliage, blocks the sun, and shuts down photosynthesis. The vine is drained from within and smothered from without at the same time. And it has a home field advantage. The lanternfly's favorite host is itself an invader. The tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima, a weed tree that thrives exactly where we've disturbed the land. Highway medians, abandoned rail lines, industrial lots. That tree forms a continuous, concentrated network of staging grounds, and it sits right alongside the very transport corridors that move the insect. The invasion came preloaded with its own infrastructure. In the vineyards, the crisis peaks in late summer when adult numbers climb sharply from early to mid-September, and feeding intensifies through the warm afternoon and into the evening. While they feed, they breed, and the reproductive math is brutal. The biology is so prolific that even the parasitic wasps studied to fight it are formidable in their own right. One species, Anastatis orientalis, with females living up to 68 days and producing an average of 94 offspring apiece under controlled conditions. That is the enemy the chemicals were trying and failing to outpace. So for years, the search was for a silver bullet, one miracle chemical, one decisive eradication that would clear the fields for good. It never arrived. What is forming in the fields instead is not victory, it is a pincer. A layered, half-improvised management system that lowers the pressure just enough for high-value farms to survive while the long game plays out. The first arm of that pincer is built by human hands. In Penn State vineyard trials, fine exclusion netting draped over the vines produced a staggering 99.8% reduction in lanternflies on the fruit. Pair that physical barrier with targeted spraying only around the perimeter, and growers cut treated acreage by roughly a third and spraying time by about 2/3, full commercial control without drowning the vineyard in chemicals. The second arm of the pincer is the one nobody ordered. It is arriving on its own, without permission. Across the eastern United States, native generalist predators have started to recognize the newcomer as food. Penn State field observers have documented native species, the spined soldier bug, several kinds of praying mantis, actively hunting and eating spotted lanternflies in ordinary backyards and fields. No one trained them, no one released them. They simply found a slow, fat, conspicuous insect sitting in plain sight, and they went to work. Meanwhile, federal and university researchers are carefully testing host-specific parasitoids from the lanternfly's homeland, Anastatus orientalis for the eggs, the wasp Drynus cynicus for the nymphs, as a long-term, self-sustaining check. The end game was never going to be eradication. It is integration, forcing this insect into a managed ecosystem where its damage is held to a level farms can live with. And the most reliable soldier in that effort turned out to be the one we never paid. That shift, from emergency to equilibrium, is also a financial story. The spotted lanternfly has hardened from a sudden crisis into a permanent line item. A continuous loop of money now moves through quarantine certificates, mandatory permit training, commercial spray programs, and research grants. And the losses compound fast. In New York's premier grape regions, the Finger Lakes and the Lake Erie District, the largest Concord producer in the world, Cornell researchers modeled the damage of an uncontrolled local infestation. $1.5 million in the first year, $4 million by the second, $8.8 million by the third. Widen the lens to the whole state and the threat reaches into the hundreds of millions of dollars across the wider grape, wine, and timber economy and thousands of jobs. To answer it, the Department of Agriculture keeps committing millions to multi-year research agreements aimed squarely at maturing those long-term biological controls, paying, in other words, to speed up the help that nature is already providing for free. The insect is no longer just an ecological event. It is a fixed cost, written directly into the operating budget of American agriculture. None of this is new. The same pattern, accidental arrival, frantic containment, eventual forced adaptation, has played out again and again. The spongy moth, once called the gypsy moth, slipped loose in the 19th century and triggered more than a century of spending and perpetual quarantine. The emerald ash borer dismantled tens of millions of native ash trees, turning a whole genus into a memory and locking cities into endless cycles of removal. The Asian carp turned the Mississippi watershed into a permanent politically charged containment project. Kudzu choked the American South until it stopped being an emergency and became a cultural symbol of a war that could not be won. And the lanternfly's own host tree, the tree of heaven, arrived centuries ago and quietly laid the perfect invisible groundwork for the insect that would one day depend on it. Each case carries the same uncomfortable lesson. We act as though commerce and biology can be kept in separate columns, as though we can move billions of tons of goods around the planet every day without moving the living world along with them. Nature does not read our manifests. It does not recognize our borders or our economic models. Given enough time, the ledger always balances. Sometimes it balances in ways no agency could have engineered, performed by creatures that never asked to be enlisted. It is 6 in the evening now, back at the woodlands. The heat of the August afternoon has finally broken. The nets are packed away, the captured insects sealed in containers for the lab. Robin Rick stands near the edge of the property, wiping grit from his brow at the end of a long day. The trees are still, and then, on the lower trunk of an old maple, a single adult lanternfly hops upward, its crimson wings flashing once in the fading light. Somewhere nearby, on a fence post, in the leaf litter, on a branch overhead, a mantis or a soldier bug is already adjusting to the same signal. We are not going to spray our way out of this. The era of total eradication is over, replaced by something humbler and more honest. a shared, altered landscape that we did not choose but now have to manage. And the real measure of success is no longer whether we can wipe the invader off the map. It is whether we have the patience, the science, and the humility to live in the world we accidentally built, and the wisdom to notice when nature has quietly started doing the work for us. Given how much of this spread is driven by our own commerce, where should the money go? Into sealing the borders ever tighter, or into accepting these invasions as a cost of global trade and funding the long-term ecological balance from the very first day?